Hello, you're watching Context. I'm Orkhan Amashov here, as usual, to ask relevant questions in pursuit of eliminating and elucidating answers. From President Donald Trump's Middle Eastern tour to the latest developments taking place in the wider Middle Eastern region, in particular bearing in mind the ongoing trip of Pakistani Prime Minister, who is currently in Azerbaijan, there are quite a number of issues that we need to discuss and look at and examine, and subject to close inspection. And today I'm delighted and honoured to have an opportunity to converse about those potential issues related to the Middle East and the wider region with Dr. Ali Bakir, Associate Professor at Qatar University. Dr. Ali Bakir, great delight to welcome you to Context.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much indeed. So, since our last conversation, which took place 2 years ago, actually,
right.
And back then, within the confines of the first scientific conference dedicated to the problems related to combating Islamophobia, a lot has changed. But Azerbaijan itself has changed. Back then, still the sort of what is referred to as a separatist junta was present in Karabakh, and the issue of the full resolution of territorial integrity was underway. And then, of course, Azerbaijan has changed massively after that point. After September 2023, there was a COP29 in this country last year, and the world has changed. I mean, there's quite a number of developments taking place in Central Asia and in the Middle East. Let's begin our conversation as a starting point. Let's focus on the Middle East. The President Donald Trump's latest Middle Eastern tour, Gulf tour, many people are saying that it has somewhat recalibrated, altered the jigsaw puzzle of the Middle East. What do you make of that trip and its implications?
Well, first allow me to congratulate you and the Azeri people for the Independence Day of Azerbaijan. And thank you again for hosting me. I think Trump needed very much this trip to happen, especially to the Gulf countries, because as you know, he was in a very challenging times. He imposed tariffs almost on all the world, and he didn't achieve a lot of success on that front. He had also challenges concerning the Israeli war on Gaza. He wanted to see a ceasefire, but that was not done. He also had some issues with the European Union and some clashes also with Canada and other countries. So he needed success in order to bank on it and to show to the American people that he's a deal maker and he wants to progress. So the Gulf countries in that context were very much proper target for Trump. And the Gulf countries also realized that Trump is in need of such a show that portray him as a successful president. So they prepared a very generous reception for him, and they signed a lot of significant deals. They said $1 trillion, something like this. So this was a win-win for both the Gulf countries and also President Trump. And this was definitely important for Qatar also, because contrary to the Trump's first term, apparently now Qatar is in a very well position vis-a-vis Trump administration. They have strengthened the ties not only with the US but also with the president, and also Saudi Arabia wanted to show that it's still the regional leader that in the Gulf and in the Middle East in general, and receiving the US president as his first foreign trip was a quite significant indication of the Saudi ambition. So I think all in all, both sides win, but at the end of the day, I don't think all the agreements will be realized. I mean, not as big as they announced. Of course, there will be some important and critical agreements to be fulfilled on the defense level, on the foreign policy level, on the economic level, investment level, but not as big as at least we heard. So this is my take on it.
And of course, one of the subjects discussed during his Middle Eastern tour was Syria and lifting of sanctions in respect to the current Syrian government. It's a very important moment. Turkey was involved in that, of course, and also we noticed that during his Gulf tour, of course, he visited specific countries: UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. There was some talk about Israel being sort of sidelined. How has it altered, or has it actually altered that intricate balance in the Middle East with when you have Gulf countries, you've got Israel and Turkey, because it looks like that what has been agreed in relation to Syria is a big win for Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and we're not entirely sure about Israel.
Yeah, you are totally right. I mean, the Syrian issue was critical to the regional countries, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar, of course, also Turkey. And President Trump himself asserted that President Erdogan, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and Emir of Qatar, they all stressed the need to remove sanctions on Syria to give the Syrian people a chance to, move forward on the right track. And that's why I think that Trump realized that this would be a good gesture towards these countries. He looked positively towards the role of these countries also in Syria. Of course, I don't anticipate that this would be for free. That's why also Syrian President Ahmed Shara sat down with President Trump, and probably he offered some of the, the joint mega project that can be done with cooperation of the U.S. in the new Syria, on the economic level, on the energy level, on the infrastructure level. And at the end of the day, Trump is a businessman, or this is how he likes to promote himself. So he liked the idea. He wants also stability to benefit from that issue in the Gulf, in Syria, in the Middle East. And from that perspective, Israel is not seen as a positive contributor to Trump's regional agenda. At the end of the day, Trump did a lot for Israel during his first term. No one U.S. president offered what to Israelis what Trump did in his first term, and he didn't receive anything in return. And he was expecting at least that during his visit to Saudi Arabia, Israel would announce an agreement with Hamas that would even empower President Trump's position in Saudi Arabia. There was a rumor that he was waiting for such declaration from Prime Minister Netanyahu so that he can also reopen the normalization issue between Saudi Arabia and Israel. This was a very big deal during at least his Trump's first term. But Netanyahu again didn't give this card for Trump. And as far as I know, he's now very upset from the Netanyahu particularly policies, and that's why we saw and we are seeing some kind of pressure on the Israelis to wrap it up and reach a deal that would help the U.S. to stabilize the situation in the whole region. So I think that's one main reason why he sidelined Israel, although many Israelis thought that he would still be able to visit Israel after the Gulf countries, but he didn't because he was very upset, and all that what Israel can give him is a bad image, bad perception in the region, and that's why he wanted to avoid visiting Israel while focusing on his own success with the Gulf countries and in the Gulf region.
How critical is it for the current administration in Washington, D.C. to ensure that Turkey and Israel to never reach the point of confliction and the deconfliction is secured? We know that some talks between Israeli and Turkish officials held in Azerbaijan as well. We know that Turkey and Israel are two important actors from Azerbaijani perspective as well, and also US seems to be very much interested in ensuring that there's no deeper conflict between them. How do you evaluate the current state of affairs in Syria when it comes to the positions of Turkey and Israel?
Look, Turkey's primary goal in Syria is to preserve the stability and unity and sovereignty of Syria, not only because this would serve the Syrian people, but it will also serve Turkey's national interest and national security, and the positive spillover of a stable Syria would also reach the regional country and the region as a whole. So this is the primary agenda of Turkey, if I may say, in Syria, and this agenda is shared also with the primary Arab regional actors and powers such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar, among others, and that's why there is an understanding that there is a need to work collectively to stabilize Syria and preserve its unity and sovereignty. However, the Israelis do not see the situation from the same perspective. They do not share the same perspective, and to be particular, Netanyahu and his government in particular, they have another agenda. They also worked effectively to destabilize Syria during the last few months, and by doing this, they undermined not only the current Syrian administration, but also the regional countries working to stabilize Syria. And this kind of policies also run against the US interest and agenda in the region. And that's why Netanyahu tried to, in his last visit to Washington, to convince President Trump of actually backing the Israeli agenda against the Turkish agenda. He also suggested that Russia should come back to Syria to its, in its military power to counter the Russian influence. But Trump didn't share this interest with Netanyahu, and actually he tried to convince him that Israel should work with Turkey when it comes to Syria. And from the Turkish perspective also, Turkey has no interest in confronting Israel, neither in Syria nor in any place. And that's why when Azerbaijan thankfully offered to play a facilitating role or to offer a platform for mediation, Turkey accepted. And as far as I know, they did 2 or 3 rounds in Azerbaijan to try to reach a de-escalatory agreement. But again, as far as I know, they didn't reach such an agreement. However, I think now Israel is not in a proper position to, to act freely in the region. At the end of the day, there are interests, and regional countries share the interest in a stable Syria, and this is also shared with the US, given that Trump himself declared from Riyadh during a meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Syrian President Ahmed Shara, and also President Erdogan joined them online, that the US is removing sanctions. And I think this is a very important and critical step to give the Syrians a chance to move forward with stabilizing the country and rebuilding their nation.
So President Trump made that declaration in Riyadh.
Yes.
He specifically paid tribute, thanked the Crown Prince, and also referred to President Erdogan. His conversation with President Erdogan. So 2 countries, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, loom large within this spectrum, within that larger scope from US perspective and in general. How do you evaluate the current state of affairs when it comes to bilateral relations between Turkey and Saudi Arabia? There were problems in the past. We know that there was actually crisis in relations. And what do you make of their current level of their interaction?
Right. So the idea that there is always problems between Turkey and Saudi Arabia when it comes to regional leadership and influence is very popular in the West. So you will always read about some sort of negative competition and crisis between the 2 countries, but I can assure you that this is not the case right now between the 2 countries. The relations are excellent, particularly since 2022 and forward on the bilateral political, economic, defense, military relations. Both sides understand each other very well. Also, they share common interest in a stabilized region, because Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, in the last 3 years, he shifted the Saudi foreign policy to focus inward in order to realize his very ambitious mega projects. And this, in order for him to be successful on that front, he needs a very stable region. And the stability, as we explained, is also the first priority for Turkey, because it's not an oil-rich country, and it needs to export its industry and its agriculture, and this needs stability in the region at the end of the day. That's why I think a stable region is a very shared common goal for both countries, and they understand that they have a complementary role to play in order to preserve that stability, and they are on the right track currently in Syria and elsewhere in the region.
It's very interesting indeed, Dr. Al-Bakr. And we know that Pakistan's Prime Minister is visiting the region. He's currently in Azerbaijan. This visit, this trip, takes place against the backdrop of important developments and full of confrontational elements when it comes to in the Pakistani realm. What do you make of this trip what does it signify, in particular in the context of the countries that he has visited, Iran, Turkey and Azerbaijan?
Yeah, as you very well know, I mean, this visit comes following the latest round of escalation between Pakistan and India. I think that the Pakistanis want to convey a message that they are moving forward towards the peace from a point of strength, not from a point of a weakness. And they would also like to thank some of the major countries which backed them during the last round of escalation, especially Turkey and Azerbaijan. And they want to open a new page with other countries, especially on the economic front. And this is where the Pakistani visit to Iran comes forward. I think that, if we speak about the political, economic and defense and military relations, the ties between Pakistan and Turkey are historically very strong, and in the last few years also ties between Pakistan and Azerbaijan are on the rise, and significantly also on the defense and military level. You know very well that Azerbaijan also signed an agreement lately, a big agreement that I think exceeds $1 billion to buy some Chinese Pakistani fighter jets, and the cooperation on the infrastructure also, business, is on the rise between the two countries. There is also a trilateral mechanism between Turkey, Pakistan and Azerbaijan, and this mechanism is very beneficial for the this triangle. And on the Iranian level, I think that Pakistanis want to increase their bilateral trade with Iran. They want also to tell the Iranians it's for their own benefit and for the benefit of the region that they normalize their ties with their neighbors in the Gulf and also with Pakistan and with Azerbaijan, as this would facilitate, not only trade, political ties, social ties, and security ties, and help stabilize the region, and also form a kind of unity bloc against any kinds of foreign intervention in the region. So I think this is the main message of the Pakistani visit to these countries.
I recall our last conversation 2 years ago, which was actually on the 16th of March. Back then, the relations between Iran and Azerbaijan were not good at all. That was almost in the wake of the lowest possible imaginable wave after the attack that took place. You remember in late January. Now looks like, in the light of all that has happened over the past 2 years, in particular in the light of the President Pezeshkian's latest trip to Azerbaijan, which received a huge media coverage and very positive one.
True.
Looks like that some sort of reset is underway, has been initiated at least, and the hopes are rife that things will change. How do you evaluate Iran's current position? First of all, vis-à-vis Azerbaijan. There are different points of view about the nature of these relations. One school of thought is that it's a perennial tug of war. Relations will be more or less acceptably nice and productive for some period, then there will be another phase when the problems will come back. There's another school of thought that these countries are natural sort of competitors, which is a continuation of the first school of thought. There's another school of thought that all of these things are quite artificial, and if the government in Tehran and government in Baku could actually envision a brighter future, there's no particular limitation and everything is artificial. I mean, I'm not asking you to choose between those two schools of thought, but what is your evaluation?
I think it's impossible mission to try to predict when it comes to the regional politics because of the many variables involved in the issue. However, I totally agree with your characterization of the Iranian-Azerbaijani relations lately, and we should not forget that also the Iranian-Saudi relations at a certain point they were like very negative relations, and then with the help of Oman, Iraq, Iraq and later China, they normalized their ties, and now relations are good, if I may say. And the same happens with Turkey also. There have been a lot of crises in the ties between the two countries concerning Syria, concerning the Gulf, concerning Azerbaijan and Armenia, but now things are stable. One main reason, in my opinion, is that the Iranians came to realization that they cannot fight on every single front by themselves, and it's a priority for them to preserve their country, and this cannot be happen without good relations with the neighboring countries, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. And at least this would give them a chance to focus against any potential escalation that might come, whether from Israel or the US, because of the nuclear issue or because of Iran's foreign policy. But at the same time, I also think that the new Iranian president has some different orientation in comparison to other power circles in the Iranian regime. So, but at the end of the day, like I said, it's hard to predict how things will go, and things might change, whether positively or negatively, at any time. So we should be ready.
Nothing is impossible. Nothing could be excluded.
Exactly.
And, I vividly remember last year when the late President Raisi was here in Azerbaijan.
Right.
Immediately after that, there were many positive comments made, and then that changed in a month's time.
Right.
But with President Pezeshkian, there is a personality factor, of course, in being of Azerbaijani descent, in being Azerbaijani and speaking fluent Azerbaijani, and all of the things, of course, create certain impression. And also, there is a talk that things may change. But as you said, it's a very fluid area,
yes,
and time will show. And when it comes to bilateral relations between states, they're so deep entrenched, they're so institutional that quite often it is very difficult for even very strong persons to change firmly established fundamentals.
Yes, and you should not forget also, just to add on what you have just said, that the biggest component in the social fabric in Iran after the Persian community is the Turkish Azeri community, and so also the president has an interest to send comforting messages to this big segment of the social fabric of Iranians, because the situation has been a little bit pressing economically on all Iranians, and good relations with Azerbaijan at least might comfort some segments internally. I think this is not out of the calculations of the Iranian policies, let's say, internally.
The necessity of sort of placating or making happy some considerable portion of the local population is not out of the calculations. It's a part of the picture. Let's move back to Turkey. Sort of PKK story. So very recently, actually a few months ago, the jailed leader of the PKK, which is internationally recognized as a terrorist organization by not just Turkey itself, but the UK, United States, European Union,
NATO,
made a call on its members of its terrorist organization, to lay down arms. And then very recently we heard about the 12th Congress of the PKK taking place in northern Iraq, and then deciding on self-dissolution. Is this finally final with PKK? What will happen to their members, you think? And what will happen to what is based in northeastern Syria? We know, we heard about, of course, naturally, on the, I think, 12th of March, it was in March when that SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, made an agreement with the central government about integration into the Syrian state. In the light of all of this development, do you think that Turkey has already finally sorted out this PKK menace, which has caused massive damage, not just in terms of human casualties, of course, but also in terms of national morale over the past decades?
Right. So first, I think that this is a very significant issue. I think dissolving the terror organization will be a positive development for the Kurds, for the Turks, for the region. I think that we should not only wait and see, but also build on that development and make sure that no raw members, because there are also fractions inside these terrorist organizations, and some of them actually work out of own interests, because it involves a lot of money, a lot of smuggling, a lot of weapons, drugs, etc. So there might be some groups that see this development negatively. That's why we heard Turkish intelligence, Turkish Foreign Minister, President Erdogan said that they will observe, the current period, and whether this is real or just like a maneuvering space. I think it's real at the current moment. I think there should be some steps taken from the government to make sure to utilize it in a very constructive and positive way. I think the positive spillover will also reach to Iraq and Syria. In the case of Iraq, there's also an agreement that occurred before this announcement with the Iraqi government, which helped actually both sides to increase their cooperation against terrorist organizations and to achieve stability, which will serve the interest of both countries. In the Syrian case, the YPG tried actually at the beginning to say we are not PKK, we are other things, and this means that we will not dissolve ourselves. But obviously, given that they became so much isolated, and the fact that the U.S. is actually taking the decision to withdraw from this region and from northern Syria, eastern Syria, part of Syria. So I think that Turkish pressure with the goodwill gesture from the Syrian central government, in addition to American advice to YPG to integrate themselves with the Syrian situation, otherwise they would face their situations and they will not be able to help them. All these factors contributed to the fact that YPG was forced to sign this agreement. Now, of course, this is also a good step forward and very positive development, but I was hearing during the last few days that also some of these members of YPG are rethinking the issue, because we have some regional countries that have been inciting them to not to accept this agreement and to try to find their own way to establish their own state or on at least decentralized region. But I think they don't have a chance to do this by themselves. If they are serious about it, they can just join the political process, submit whatever they want to an elected parliament, and if the parliament agrees, they can put it to a referendum. If a referendum approves their request, then they can have decentralized system or their own region. Other than that, I think they don't have a chance to sabotage the situation unless they they are backed by foreign powers. At the current moment, as I said, all Syria's neighbors, with the exclusion at least for the Netanyahu government, they want a stable, united and sovereign Syria, and that's why I think we are moving in the right direction at the current moment.
Since we are discussing the wide range of issues and we are discussing the whole sort of scope of the Middle East, let's just briefly touch upon what's happening in Lebanon, just very briefly if I may. It's a very troubled country, has always been very troubled. Some stability seems to have been instilled there as well as of early 2025. And to what extent do you think what happened in Syria, these developments succeeding the 8th of December change of government, has impacted what we are currently observing in Lebanon? Because, of course, everything is interconnected.
Exactly.
Yeah, and please, Hezbollah is one of the elements, of course.
Exactly. I just want to stress the idea that everything is interconnected, because also the developments in Lebanon affect Syria, and developments in Syria can affect also Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. Yeah. I think that there is an understanding that we need to stabilize Syria, because it's a very important country, and the spillover of the positive outcomes of this stability can help the Lebanese government to rebuild also the Lebanon and stabilize the situation in Lebanon. The same in Jordan, and with the absence of terrorism, also Turkey can be again very active in terms of trade and exports. So I think with the establishment of the mechanism from the Turkish side that included Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. This mechanism will ensure that these countries try to cooperate on the security level when it comes to the borders, when it comes to countering drugs traffic, when it comes to countering radicalism, countering terrorism, as well as exploring options to increase the trade relations between these countries. All this can be achieved if we make sure that the Syrian situation is stabilized. So everyone right now is banking on the Syrian situation. However, having said this, we should always take into consideration that it will not be an easy task for the Syrian officials to move forward with the situation in Syria, because you have like 15 years of this total destruction, and there's no economic infrastructure, there is no political infrastructure, no security infrastructure, and thus it's very hard to move forward. Second, we should always also adjust our perceptions concerning the process of rebuilding Syria. If we are expecting swift and quick rebuilding, then we will have a disappointment, and this disappointment can be translated into negative implications. So we should be realistic, we should be patient, we should make sure that we are on the right track. This is the most important thing, and have patience, because things are not easy.
Indeed, but there was some degree of disappointment regarding Syria when those events of those tragic events took place in Latakia, for example. Some people were saying that is it a return to the past, but luckily it seems to have been sorted out in a timely fashion. So we are discussing everything related to Middle East, and it's Turkey at the heart of each single development that we discussed and touched upon. Let's focus on what is happening now regarding Russia-Turkey relations. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is in Turkey, and recently there was an attempt to organize direct talks between between Ukrainian and Russian delegations, and that resulted with some degree of success. There was a large sort of agreement on the prisoners of war. Where do you see Turkey when it comes to Ukraine peace process? Initially, when the first contacts took place in Saudi Arabia, many people were saying that Turkey was sidelined and there was no place for Turkey in this larger configuration. Now Turkey seems to have emerged re-emerged as a player to have a say. What is your evaluation of the latest talks and Turkey's role?
I think first there is always a space for whoever wants to contribute constructively to solving crisis.
So do you think that there is also a degree of complementarity between Turkey and Saudi Arabia?
Definitely. Like I said, it's not like either me or them, and everyone can work on certain level. They can complement each other. But Turkey has been leading the process of mediation between the two parties since the war erupted in 2022. And from the Turkish perspective, the war will ultimately end on a negotiation table, not on the ground, on the battle. And also with its own capacity, Turkey mediated several times between the two countries and achieved also critical outcomes, including the very well-known grain deals which helped the food security situation in the world. And then we had a very significant also prisoners swap that involved Germany, the US, Russia, and other countries. And now we have the biggest also swap of prisoners between Russia and Ukraine. So we have a kind of progress, and my understanding is that Turkey will continue to exert the pressure and try to seek solution through mediation from both sides. I understand also that the Turkish position from this perspective is very much aligned at the current moment with the US administration, because before, they were accusing Turkey of being in the sphere of influence of Russia, but this turned to be a wrong perception from the Europeans and the Americans, and we saw that the Turkish stance was and still on the right track. I think also during Mr. Hakan's visit to Russia, there's an agreement between the two countries also on regional issues. Yani, two countries agreed the necessity to end the war on Gaza. They agree on the necessity to preserve Syria's unity and territorial integrity. They agree on the need to stabilize the region. They also discuss a kind of cooperation to bring stability to Libya, which is something new, given that Turkey played a significant role in countering Russia's influence in Libya during the last few years, when mostly European countries were busy trying to isolate Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think that there are many topics that both countries can coordinate on, and I think that it's pretty much necessary at this current moment to keep channels open between conflicting parties. Having said this, also Turkey is very firm when it comes to recognizing, for example, Al-Qurm and other Ukrainian lands as under Russian occupation. So Turkey maintains this position, and I don't think that we will see any kind of change on that position in the future.
Now, you mentioned about recognizing Ukraine's territorial integrity, recognizing Crimea is sovereign part of Ukraine. This seems to be one of the key stumbling blocks in negotiations and in the context of direct talks. Recently, there was some talk about US recognizing not Russian sovereignty, but Russian control over Crimea. What do you make of that nature of the negotiation? Because what is very clear, Russia currently physically occupies certain sovereign Ukrainian lands, about 20% of Ukraine's sovereign territory. They believe that it shouldn't retrench, they should stay there, and they believe that those parts of Ukraine are already Russian territory from their perspective. But nobody, I mean, within the international community, amongst the preponderant part of the human civilization, so to speak, is firmly in favor of Ukraine's territorial integrity. But Russia is absolutely not willing to retrench from that position, retract from that. How do you see the compromise solution? Will it be actually a compromise?
It's a very hard and critical question. There is no doubt that Russia is occupying sovereign Ukrainian lands in the eastern country and also in Crimea. There is no question that from the international law perspective that Russia is an invader. There is no question that the international community should always resist Russia's ambitions to, grab more lands from Ukraine. I think that Turkey will maintain its position that these lands are occupied by Russia. The U.S. position, however, is very much confusing given the personal ties between Trump and Putin, and I think that it would be a grave mistake to allow Russia to swallow just like these lands of Ukraine. It would constitute a dangerous, precedent, and this would open the door for other powers to try to imitate what Russia has been doing during the last few years towards Ukraine or towards other countries. And we have potential cases in which other countries can do the same. We have China and Taiwan. We have also the U.S. and you hear the U.S. and Greenland. Trump, ambitious of inviting Greenland to be part of the U.S. or even Canada. So I don't think this is the right position. I think the Russians should be also rational. I think a compromise can happen if we know the real problems with the Russian position, because it's a shifting position. Sometimes they say it's about NATO. Sometimes they are saying no, these are Russian territories, about historic lands, and sometimes they are talking about fears of enlargement of European Union, enlargement of NATO. So we need to understand what actually the Russians want and then try to address the situation. Whether the Ukrainians will agree to give Russia some part of their lands or not, this is also up to them. But I think that they should not be pressured to do this, because if the US and the Europeans cut the support for Ukraine, then they are in a very bad situation to have a free will to do whatever they want to do.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Alibek. So grateful to you for your time. We had a fantastic conversation, largely centered on the developments taking place in the Middle East. We actually started with Donald Trump's Middle Eastern Gulf tour. The implications of that were discussed. Then we navigated with a travel to Iran, then came back to Turkey, and then talked about Israeli-Turkish sensibilities. Ended up discussing Ukraine. So
and Pakistan also.
And also absolutely right,
Yes.
because that's the current news, of course. Pakistani Prime Minister visiting Azerbaijan. So
Sure.
it was a very, very interesting and quite a unique sort of episode of context. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.